Hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Retail Tech Summit NPC 2018. So just to give you a context, not just about the event, but about myself. My name is Rohit Radhakrishnan. I am the regional lead for NASSCOM 10,000 startups in the Western region. So previously I had my startup life, and being in NPC was a big thing, and I could never do that. Finally I'm here, and it is awesome, just like I'm pretty sure all of you are experiencing. So the opening is pretty much an exciting agenda for all of you. So I'll just set the context in a way. We all know that there was a time when retail meant only one thing, a physical store. But today, retail can mean everything from a brick and mortar and online to mobile and voice-based search. But for consumers, however, the motivating factors behind their purchases are still the same. They want their goods at a reasonable price as soon as possible. Most shoppers flit back and forth between these various touch points. One of the main challenges the retailers face today is to get people back into their stores. One of the ways they're doing it is by bringing the digital experience into the store. So we are going to do a deep dive into this today, and we have some really incredible business leaders in retail technology industry who have been shaping the future in retail. So for the start, we have an amazing business leader with us. It is really exciting to have you here. So I remember, I was with Sahil when we were really trying hard to get you, and when you confirmed, I remember we were like jumping and high-fiving each other that finally we have you here. So without a delay, I am thrilled to invite our first speaker to the session to talk about the road ahead for retail, preparing for the future of retail. So I invite Mr. Ananth Narayanan, CEO of Myntra Jabong, to start the session.
Morning. What he didn't tell you actually about twisting my arm is one of the NPC members and he said no products in Myntra will get launched if I don't come and speak here. So I figured that it would be wise. I was just kidding. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So much appreciated. What I thought I could do is maybe spend literally 10-15 minutes just laying out three things. One is, how's the Indian consumer changing? Second, talk a bit around what's really going on in the world of retail, and how's online, offline converging, and how's that actually going to continue to change. And then finally, perhaps end with what are some of the innovations we're seeing, some of them at Myntra, but others maybe outside. Just so that I get a feel for the audience, how many of you actually have shopped on Myntra or Jabong here? Okay, wonderful. This is a great audience already. Okay, so I'm just going to jump in. So changing Indian consumer, retail landscape, and some select innovations. So just to start with, right, just the number of mobile phones in India continues to explode, will continue to explode. We have more than 650 million phones, out of which 300 odd million are smartphones. This number continues to grow in scale. So how retail will happen changes. Just because you now have a computer in your pocket, which is always available 24/7, so when and how you shop changes. At Myntra, most shopping happens between 9 and 12 in the night. So it's one of those things where when you have something constantly available at your fingertips and on your phone, your consumer behavior changes. So India going mobile is one big phenomenon. All of you, I'm sure, are quite familiar with it. The second is, for those of you, again, there may be a lot of numbers on this chart, but this growth isn't slowing down. So if you just think about it, there are about 229 million 3G smartphone users. So this is roughly the number of WhatsApp as well. Most people expect that to be about 700 plus million very shortly by 2023. The other is, if you look at all, e-commerce gets more headlines than it probably needs to, but roughly there are about 60 million shoppers today who are actually e-commerce shoppers. That number will be 250 to 350 million in 5 years. Again, a combination of continued internet penetration and consumers becoming more familiar with actually transactions online. So this growth isn't slowing down. The third fact is The next 100 million users that are actually coming onto this platform are very different from the previous 100 million. So the first 100 million that came on the platform, and we're seeing this every day at Myntra, were much younger. They were mostly urban. They were mostly men. And most of the language of transaction was English. If you look at what's happening going forward, 55% is going to be older. There's going to be more rural. There are more women, which is actually good for us being in the fashion space. Much better lifetime value of consumers, and more vernacular. Therefore, voice will start to become more important. So the next 100 million customers that are coming in are going to be very different. The other is just the age profile and demographics. So if you look at Gen Z population, we will have 585 million Gen Z population. So these are, unlike the millennials who were born in 1983, are much more digital natives because they've grown up actually with apps, with the mobile revolution, and so they actually shop and do things very differently. And finally, if you look at the behavior of the consumer, the life cycle of a consumer from when they start to when they actually shop is becoming much shorter. So typically a customer, if you go back 5 years ago, would start by actually getting a digital device. They would typically do browsing. So look for news, look for entertainment. Then you go on to social media. Then you finally buy digital. You buy your train tickets or your plane tickets online. And then finally to physical products. That number has gone from 5 years, actually now, not to the 2 to 3 years, but to 18 months. So I think just to summarize, right, we have lots of mobile phones, and that's going to continue. Second, the overall number of shoppers is continuing to increase and will continue to increase exponentially, and we'll get to 250 to 300 million by 2023. The nature of the shoppers is going to be different, which is there will be more women, there'll be more rural, there'll be more vernacular. And finally, the consumer journey in digital is actually shortening. So all of these actually lead to a bunch of explosive growth in terms of consumption in this country. The other big macro factor, of course, is that GDP per capita continues to grow up. How fast it grows, etc., is an economics conversation. Nobody ever gets it right. But this phenomenon will help increase consumption. So with that as background, if you just look at overall retail globally, it's changing. So if you take traditional companies, we obviously have been invested in by Walmart. But if you look at Walmart, John Lewis, Macy's, they're all making big pushes towards actually saying what's an omni-channel experience. Traditional online players, including us, are trying to figure out what will an omni-channel experience look like. And then there is a bunch of digital-first brands that are born with digital in mind, with most of the marketing done digitally to the Gen Z consumers. That whole phenomenon is continuing to increase globally. In India, it will be even more accelerated. And the reason it will be accelerated is modern retail in this country actually is only in the top 30, 40 cities. Beyond that, actually, the reach is primarily through e-com, right? The second is, if you just think about retail in India, which is what all of this is about, we started off with mom and pop shops. We then got into organized retail with the likes of Shoppers, Lifestyle, whole bunch of folks who actually basically said, guilt-free shopping, great visual merchandising, easy parking, the consumption experience is much better. I think we're getting into experiential retail now, where the reach comes from e-commerce, but you actually have experience centers that actually do things that online cannot do. So I'll give you an example. We have a set of franchisee stores that actually we operate through a set of franchisees for one of our big private brands, Roadster. Roadster this year will be 100 million type brand, which is continuing to scale. We said we want to actually start stores because we want the consumer to say, how do we actually get online? We want the consumer to look at brands and make the brand real. So we started a few stores. The most interesting thing about this was the online sales around the catchment area of the stores increased after the offline presence started. The brand became more real for the customer. So now we're thinking about this as omni-channel. For me is really, it's an often used buzzword, but it's really around how do I there are two parts. How do I have one view of the customer, which is wherever the customer is, whether he's offline or online, I'm able to treat them seamlessly. The second is one view of inventory, which is wherever the inventory is, whether it's in a shop, whether it's in a warehouse, we're able to make it live, so we make the process more efficient, right? So Indian landscape in retail will evolve and will continue to evolve quite a bit. The other is, if I take an India phenomenon, this may be famous last words, in 5 years from now, if somebody invites me back, these numbers may be wrong. But my view is, given the fact that organized retail in this country is still very limited to the top 30, 40 cities, at least in fashion, I believe that 50% of organized retail will happen through e-commerce. So folks like Myntra and Jabong, where we actually do branded fashion primarily, will be 50% of organized retail. That's dramatically different today from where it is today. And the reason is, again, just distribution reach, the ability to sell branded products. Now, this represents huge opportunity in tech. It represents huge opportunity for brands. It represents huge opportunity. So we run a program called a Brand Accelerator, where essentially very small brands can come, sign up, and actually scale. One of those brands, which is one of my favorite stories, is a brand called Ux. It's a small ethnic wear brand started in Jaipur, and now the brand is about 20x the size of what it used to be and continues to scale. So it provides disproportionate opportunity for people who can come in and do more, right? So again, Indian consumer is changing, consumption will change, it'll be very digital. As far as retail is concerned, both globally and in India, the phenomenon that's happening is online and offline experiences will converge. The key to think through it is how to make it complementary and not competing with each other. In India in particular, organized retail will continue to grow, but e-commerce, a part of organized retail, will become a larger and larger share given the distribution reach of e-commerce. I finally wanted to take you through, to make some of these real, a couple of examples. Now, these are obviously more Myntra examples, but I think there are many others that are doing this. So I wanted to talk through three big areas. The first is innovations in design in retail. The second is supply chain-based innovations, at least on what we're seeing. And lastly, how the store of the future is being reimagined. So I'll quickly take you through. The first is we do something called Vorta. A lot of us who are at Myntra today didn't come from fashion background or fashion and retail background. So we actually thought of this, thought of fashion design and said, can you actually reimagine this process? What I mean by that is, if you think about fashion, fashion today actually is a very sort of 150-year-old process. You have autumn, winter, and you have spring, summer. In a country which has mostly summer, it's quite meaningless, right? And you think about it, most of it is actually organized. It's done such that you order something 2 years before it actually gets made, 6 months before you lock in the order. And then if you actually look at the actual season sales, 70% gets sold and 30% gets liquidated at the end of season. So it's not a particularly efficient supply chain. We said, given all the data that we actually have, can we actually do something better? So what we decided is we have lots of consumer data. We are also able to crawl through social media websites. So we are able to, because of all the data that we have, figure out what is a best-selling recipe. So in a t-shirt in this season, this color sells, this kind of collar sells. We're able to quickly get to a recipe that actually works with all the data that we have. India being a manufacturing hub, you can actually get the product produced very quickly in 45 days and sell it. So we actually have created an intelligent fast fashion that actually is doing incredibly well. One example of this is these are two brands of ours. One is called Moda Rapido and the other is called Here and Now. There are almost no designers in this. It's basically product managers and engineers are doing it. Each of these brands is scaling substantially. You know, as you can see, it's 150 and 350 crores, which in the Indian retail landscape is quite large. If you think about intelligent fast fashion coupled with the distribution reach of companies like Myntra, you again start to see incredible opportunities for building not just 150 and 350 crore brands, but $500 million, $1 billion brands that can come out of India, right? So it's again a very exciting possibility. So this is one element. Again, quite interesting because if you think about design, design is one of the last things where you expect AI machine learning to be applied, but actually it's happening and it's happening quite successfully. The second is I wanted to give you some examples around supply chain and what's happening in supply chain. Again, these words don't mean much to you, but just think about it. So if you think about fashion supply chain, returns are a big problem, right? Size and fit are the eternal problems of fashion supply chains, right? So you always get 20, 25% returns because the size doesn't fit. How can you use data to recommend the right size? And how do you actually make sure that we can use it to recommend the right size for the user so it's better? It's one kind of problem where AI and machine learning is applied. Mensa is another interesting one where we actually have now almost 10,000 Kirana stores doing the last mile delivery, and all we do is create a full tech backbone. Forward deployment. Fashion is typically a very high width, low depth category, so it's very hard to predict where the inventory is going to sell. And also we are actually in the business where we not only want to grow, but we actually do want to make money doing it. So we don't want to airship everything. So how do we actually intelligently forward deploy inventory before the customer buys? So before a customer clicks buy, Can we predict that the customer is going to buy, and can we actually forward deploy it? These are just some examples around how AI is being used in supply chain in a fashion, tech, retail context that's changing the way how how this whole thing will evolve. This is again today done online, but it can be done for an offline retailer as well. And then I'll finally end a little bit with in-store tech. In-store tech is really how can you reimagine what the store of the future will look like. If you think about online and offline converging, by definition, the online experience the offline experience should do something very different than what is currently done today. So we did something very simple. For those of you who haven't visited our Roadster store, please do so. We have 2 Roadster stores, one in Indiranagar and another one in a mall nearby. The RFID tech is very simple. What we did is we said, if you take a consumer journey in a store, what are the real pain points today? One, you don't get enough information about what the product is like. Often we found that customers are in a store, but on their phones, checking the price of the good online, right? And the third big pain point we found is checkouts typically take very long, especially when there are events. So how can we change all of that? We did something very simple, developed in-house, developed by our team in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks. We said we'll put an RFID tag on every garment. We got it at the right price point where it made sense. We then put up product discovery kiosks and self-checkout kiosks. So the product discovery kiosk, you can take any number of the garments, you put it on the product discovery kiosk. It gives you every detail from our online catalog. It gives you the online price. It tells you all the different sizes that are available. The other classic problem with stores today is that there is often times when you're not able to get the size that you actually want, which is a problem that doesn't exist online, right? So how do you actually make the inventory fungible? The self-checkout is another interesting phenomenon. You can take all of the items that you want, you put it inside the kiosk, right? It gives you the listing automatically. When you take a product out, it disappears from it. You swipe your credit card. The minute the credit card goes through, it deactivates the RFID tag. You just walk out and there's no alarm that goes off. Again, simple problems, but if you start with a consumer-backed view of what the issues are and you use technology, you can come up with something very different. So we're trying to reimagine the store experience with a one view of inventory, with consumer decision journeys that are very different. Likewise, we now have computer vision. One of the big advantages of online retail is that you know everything that a customer actually does. You know what they've browsed, how much time have they spent, which part of the consumer journey are they in. In an offline store, that's almost impossible to find. So now we actually have computer vision in all our malls, in our stores, where we're able to actually track where are the customers spending time inside a store. It allows us to make more intelligent merchandising decisions. It allows us to make more intelligent decisions around how you actually set the store up and the store layout so that we can make it more efficient for the customer. So I'll stop here. In summary, number one, consumers are changing and changing dramatically in India. And I think the more you take advantage of it, almost all of us underestimate the nature of that change in the long term, and we think too much of it will happen in the short term, but at least for those of us who are in the online space, we're seeing it, and we're seeing it every year. So that consumer journey changing is happening. Second, retail is not about offline versus online. It's about reimagining new experiences and creating an experience in omnichannel that complements the two. Third, AI and machine learning are actually creating possibilities for us to reimagine both offline and online experiences. A few of the examples that I gave you around design are just the start. There'll be many, many more that happen. Hopefully that's helpful. I still have about 13 minutes, I guess. I'm happy to take Q&A and answer questions. Great, thanks. Yep.
I write for Mint Newspaper.
Yeah.
I write for Mint Newspaper. My question is that your target is the next 100 million customers. So what is the strategy that Myntra is going to go about it? Because right now what I see is that it's mostly urban-centric.
Yeah. So I think the next 100 million customers, I think one of the big plays that we are actually having is around vernacular. So around voice-based, right? So we're actually piloting a whole bunch of things on the Myntra app where you can actually order through voice. We're also trying to actually experiment with chatbots that can actually do a variety of things. We're also playing around on the selection, which says for the next 100 million users who are perhaps a bit older, who are more women, how do we change the selection? So all three, I think, will help us get to the next 100 million. Some of it will also happen naturally. I think the larger e-com players will continue to get these customers online, and some of that will already come into Myntra.
This is Suprit Anupam from Inc42 Media. You spoke about a lot of innovation
Yes.
and R&D in retail sector. Now, tell me, how does this affect the pricing? Because in India or Indian market, everything is about pricing at the end of the day. So,
I actually disagree. I think one of the things that I am finding, by the way, for customers in India is they're actually trying to find more value. So our private brands are a classic example. Our private brands provide great value for what they actually offer, and you find that the private brands are growing much faster, right? So there is a need for branded fashion. I think it is less around price and more around value. So the question is, how can you give more functionality and features at the appropriate price for the customer?
Hi.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm Hemant Walia from Delhi.
Yeah.
One thing I saw, a friend of mine has a retail store. How do you liquidate your non-moving stock? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of stock which is left over.
Sure. So, I mean, it's less of a problem for us. So I'll tell you, in a classic retail store, I'll give you one example. Cut sizes are a problem. So when you have a size chart, you know, the 32 to 36 sells out, below 32 doesn't sell, greater than 36 doesn't sell. And then you're left with a lot of stock at the end of the season. The advantage of having an online retailer is that you're able to personalize. Because we have a lot of monthly active users and we know something about them, you can personalize it. So cut sizes, in fact, become an advantage in online. So I think there's multiple ways we think about it, but really I think the ultimate answer is personalization.
Okay, so at the end of the day, you don't have to liquidate.
Of course, there'll be some amount of liquidation that happens, but I think it's less of a problem in online than it is offline.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, this is Sushil. I run a personalized fashion brand called My Perfect Fit. My question, there were 2 points that you mentioned. One is about 45 days time for turnaround of fashion. It reduces. Second, you talked about the fit-related issue, the returns and all.
Sure.
How do you see the custom-made can even reduce it further and change the landscape to some extent?
So I think the custom clothing market in India is still at its infancy. I think that, of course, there's opportunity. I think it appeals to a certain segment which is still very small today. I think the 45-day turnaround is less around custom for us. It's more around being more thoughtful around how do we block fabric and so on ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, anybody. I'm okay. Yeah.
Garment manufacturers.
Yep.
And if you look at traditional garment manufacturing,
Yep.
the brands buy in large volumes. And today, some of these garment manufacturers are razor thin margins and lot
Yeah.
of real issues. What is your advice to them? Because you are forward integration for them.
Yeah, I think one would be around think about actually creating brands so that you can actually take more of the value chain, in my view. The second is, I think, also innovate in the manufacturing process so that actually smaller batch becomes something that's more interesting. The reason is online is a width play, not a depth play. So your minimum order quantities are very different. So the garment manufacturer that cracks that is actually going to have a lot of gain. So both those, I think, would be interesting. Good question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Irendra Chabra. So
Yeah.
I'm from ESET, I lead GIC, but I'm not from media. So my question is that we keep hearing that Amazon or Flipkart has become a Google for products. So my question is, what's the future for single category products like fashion, healthcare, beauty, furniture, etc., etc.?
Right.
Is it because you create more depth or create more private brands or any other reason? So I'm still looking for that an answer. And so what should be the USP for the new entrant, say, in an e-commerce industry?
I think I don't quite understand. I think there were too many questions on that one, but let me
So,
just try and answer at least a couple of them. I think in e-commerce, there are two types of categories. There are categories that are more browse-oriented. So these are categories like fashion, like furniture, where typically inspiration matters a bit more. It's not a daily need. Nobody needs to shop for fashion every day. The average customer shops 4.5 times in a year, right? There, the real play is how do you create the tech platform that allows a customer to browse, to actually be more engaged. So the average customer comes 12 times a month to Myntra, 12 times a month. They obviously don't shop
Same
12 times
customer.
a month. Same customer, unique customer, same unique customer comes 12 times a month because we actually put content and commerce together, right? It becomes an inspiration, it becomes window shopping, it becomes all of that. So I think that's really important to do if you are actually a vertical focused player because you need to create inspiration in the eyes of your customer. I think that's probably the big reason why verticals exist relative to horizontals. Hopefully I answered that. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jyoti. I'm from Target.
Yeah.
I have a observation what you have done on Myntra. So whenever you do a 100 card, usually what happens is like you do a revisit. Usually all the items got, it just gets.
Ma'am, if you have a product suggestion for me, I'm happy to chat about it offline. If you have a question, I'm happy to take it. Because there's just 5 more people. So if you have a question, would you mind? Yeah, I'd be happy to take the suggestion. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, my question is more around the profitability of Myntra's e-commerce business. So,
Yeah.
can you specify what strategy that Myntra has adopted, or top 1 or 2 things that you have done to kind of focus on building a sustainable business? Let it be around the assortment that you sell, or fulfillment strategy, or supply chain. Anything.
Yeah, sure. I think a few different things. The first is really around our private brand play, like you mentioned. I think private brands generally have greater profitability. So our private brands contribution has gone up. That helps. The second is, how do you actually get the right amount of price discounting volume, and how do you manage that through tech-led pricing? The third is things like I mentioned, forward deployment. How do you get 2-day delivery without air shipping so that we actually optimize supply chain? I think all of those contribute to creating sustainable businesses. Yeah.
I'm Devashish. I run a retail store called the Damak Store and Cafe.
Yeah.
I was more interested in knowing about how do you incubate new upcoming brands and give the platform to your community.
Yeah, great question. So we have something called the Brand Accelerator Program. Historically, brands have had it tough to actually scale and grow in India for 2 reasons. One is they lack consumer data, and therefore getting the assortment mix right has always been difficult. The second is distribution reach. So national distribution reach has become very difficult. I think with companies like Myntra and others, it just becomes easier to solve both those problems. So our accelerator program, we look for young budding entrepreneurs who have great design sensibilities, who have a brand that's already started. We put them into our program. We actually then work with them to basically say, how do you scale this, right? And we have about 15 brand accelerator program and are continuing to grow that.
Would you do that for retail formats as well?
No, not currently. I think we're doing it only for brands. Yeah.
I had a suggestion. Since fashion is not an emergency purchase, if you could request your consumers to pre-order some items and say the delivery will be after a month, after a week or month, whatever is your production duration, maybe you can just try just-in-time manufacturing and not have excess stock. And
thank you.
And maybe you should pass on some discounts to people who pre-order.
I think discounting and giving more discounts is not our biggest top-of-mind problem now, but thank you for the suggestion, man. Appreciate it. So, good. Terrific. Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ananth. So I'll request Anupam, who's a champion for this event, to give a token of gratitude to Ananth for his time. Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much. Can we have a bigger round of applause, please, sir? Thank you, Ananth. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.